Welcome to Roil Road, where we ask the question, what road are we all on and how do we navigate it? Today, Brian Martinez and I will be discussing political division, focusing on the viral telephone exchange where Joe Biden demonstrated that he had not heard the popular right-wing meme, "Let's go Brandon." Why hadn't Biden heard of it? And why does the right find the meme so entertaining? But first, let me tell you about Roil. Roil is a better way to enjoy content online. You just tell Roil which internet content you like, such as YouTube channels, podcasts, and more. And then you can access them all in one place, the Roil app. It also uses content interconnection to break free from tech monopolies. Check the links below to learn more. Roil is just getting started, but it's going to be big. Be among the first to discover Roil. Now, let's get this show on the road. Hello, Brian. So good to see you again.
Good to see you too, John. How are you?
I'm very well. Happy New Year.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, how was your New Year's, by the way?
Well, we keep it pretty quiet. We just do the family with the kids. Traditionally, we're East Coast time. So traditionally, we have celebrated London time New Year's, which is 7 o'clock p.m., which the kids honestly are getting a little bit too old to be satisfied for that. So we did end up staying a little bit later this time. How was your New Year's?
It was pretty good. It was quiet. I understand that Big Ben rang on New Year's in London. And it was the first time it had rung in many years. I read that somewhere. But yeah, I mean, normally I'm up until midnight, but this time my wife and I just watched The Hobbit and we fell asleep before the clock struck midnight. And we knew it was New Year's somewhere, so it's no big deal. So we said our Happy New Year's in the morning.
Well, and here we are. This is the first week of 2022, and the smart move for us to record first week rather than the last week of 2021 is it gets us out of having to do any New Year's predictions. The world is too unpredictable now to want to be making predictions about anything, and now it's 2022. It's too late. We're already almost 2% done with the year. It would be like betting on a game after the game's already started. So
yeah, sorry. I'm going to have to keep all of my Nostradamus knowledge to myself about 2022, but just now prepare yourselves.
What I have in the lineup for stories today is we're mostly going to be focusing on something that has been in the news. People have covered it. I'm sure anybody listening has some familiarity about it, which was the Joe Biden Christmas call-in event where he took calls from the public, and one father reached out to him and they had a very nice conversation, but that guy signed off with "Let's go Brandon," and Biden had no idea what he was talking about, and in fact just, I guess, tried to stay positive and said, "Let's go Brandon, I agree." Like, how much Biden had not heard of it was pretty astonishing.
Yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful Christmas as well. Merry Christmas, and let's go Brandon.
Let's go Brandon, I agree.
And sort of the right-wing media bundled that up as a story. That is, this guy's more clueless than they could ever imagine because they had heard the "Let's go Brandon" tagline so many times. And honestly, I'm shocked that he hadn't heard of that at all. I mean, somebody should have given him the memo. But just to briefly recap what had happened, the "Let's go Brandon" meme and how it's gotten going. It arose from a NASCAR race where the winner was this racer named Brandon.
Oh my God, it's just such an unbelievable moment.
Brandon, you also told me, as you can hear the chants from the crowd, "Let's go Brandon." Brandon, you told me you were going to kind of hang back those first two stages and just watch.
He was being interviewed by a trackside reporter, and while he was being interviewed, the crowd was very audibly chanting, "F Joe Biden, F Joe Biden," although you're saying it full out, right?
Yeah, not saying F.
And not saying F. And the reporter said, don't you hear them? They're chanting, "Let's go Brandon." So it's very clear on the tape. I I don't think that it's like a Laurel Yanny, like, audio illusion type situation. It sounds very clear. Although I wouldn't imagine that she was intentionally spinning it. But who would ever know?
I
But
mean,
it caught on.
It's possible, but there are reasons for it that I imagine could have come up, not simply because she wanted to run partisan cover for Joe Biden per se, but to talk as I think she was trying to distract from anyone hearing the F-bomb, basically, that was being chanted. So she just made it say, oh, well, I think it sounds like this. And if I say that, then maybe people will start to hear that, and then they won't hear the foul language. And I mean, that's if I'm being really, really charitable, but I wouldn't put that outside of the realm of possibility either, so.
Well, in any case, it immediately caught fire on the right because it was a perfect storm. It was killing two birds with one stone. It was, down on Joe Biden, of course, which is a very popular thing on the right. But it was also hitting the nail on the head of something that the right feels happens almost constantly, where they see that the sky is blue and the media says, oh, look at that green sky. Only an idiot wouldn't think that sky is green. And this happenstance allowed the right to sort of combine those two things, those two grievances together. One, they don't like Joe Biden, and two, they feel like the media is constantly spinning to them. Combine those two sort of core popular grievances into one cute, pithy, idiomatic. It's also got the vibe of like when you're taking language in high school and you learn how to swear in the foreign language and you're like, ooh, this is kind of allowed, right? And so it's got that going for it. So it's very understandable to me why it's gotten so popular. The amazement is that Biden didn't know about it.
Let's go, Brandon. I agree.
So anyway, the event happens. It's off to the races on both sides of the media. The right saying, look how clueless he is, because that's a line they want to push on Biden. And the right is saying, I might have said that reversed. The right is saying, look how clueless he is. The left is saying, look how mean the right is. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so the first story that I'm going to start sharing is where the right watches the left go, oh, look how mean the right is, and tries to reframe sort of what the left is doing and say, here's the left all triggered and upset about this father who said this thing to Biden. And so it's like the left's reaction gave the right another chance to ping pong it back and tell their base, tell their base sort of the only thing that media ever says these days, which is, look how crazy the other side is. So I'm going to share this story from Fox News and sort of go through it. Okay. The headline declares, mainstream media fume over dad saying, let's go Brandon to Biden. Quote, vulgar right-wing slur. So this is the framing. Media fumes, and they characterize let's go Brandon as a vulgar right-wing slur. Now, I'll tell you, when I first saw that, vulgar right-wing slur is obviously very chosen by Fox to be the thing to highlight. I was like, slur? I don't know. When I think slur, I think like a racial slur.
Yeah, like
I feel like that's sort of idiomatically what people think. Is slur an appropriate description of it? So let me look up slur. So I go to the dictionary and I looked at a couple dictionaries and I find, sort of to my surprise, that at least per the dictionary, racial or group focus is less of a definitional aspect of the word slur than what I thought. Okay, so the first definitions that you see sort of everywhere, things like, here we have an insulting or disparaging remark or innuendo, a shaming or degrading effect. So I guess it's that first one, disparaging remark or innuendo. Okay, it meets that definition. Although it's interesting how both sides are now playing the game with that definition, right? The left chose to use a maybe dictionary correct, but idiomatically weird feeling use of the word slur to describe let's go Brandon, right? And then the right picks up on that in order to say, look, they're in order to sort of imply, look, they're maybe racializing it in some way. At least that's my reading of the impact of those terms. Okay, now Fox News goes on to argue that mainstream journalists have, since the event, treated the phrase as vulgar and vitriol, going so far as to compare people who use the phrase to ISIS sympathizers. ISIS sympathizers. That is a bold claim for Fox News to be making. Their headline is, the left mainstream media is going nuts over this, and sort of their first piece of demonstration is that it's a comparison to ISIS sympathizers. And what's going on? Okay, who's making this comparison? In order for it to be high up in the story, one would have to apprehend that this is like coming from a real from a real source that does seem to speak for the mainstream. Mainstream media journalists, okay, ISIS sympathizers, that's the claim. Okay, so, and they link to it. They link to it here, and what do we get?
Another Fox article?
Another Fox article recounting where media compare pilot who reportedly told passengers, "Let's go Brandon," to a drug abuser, ISIS sympathizer. Okay, so here they are. They're pushing the ISIS sympathizer narrative. How strong is their backup evidence? But also, let's pause and reflect on what on the situation that Fox News is addressing here. What had happened is people on a commercial flight, passengers are on a commercial flight, right? And the pilot comes over the intercom, right? Then normally talk about headwinds or tailwinds or going around weather, something like that. This pilot from a mainstream, I guess, common carrier airline is getting on there saying, "Let's go Brandon." Outlandish. Can you imagine? Why would this pilot be doing that? It's not surprising that that's going to engender a serious response, or what's the right term? A indignant response.
From passengers?
From passengers or from people who are aware of it. So where do we get the ISIS thing? Okay, so Fox News says, CNN analyst Asha Aganapa, who appeared to compare the Southwest pilot to an ISIS sympathizer. Okay, now here's the quote that is substantiating their claim that their comparison was made. And the tweet is below it, that the quote was in. "As an experiment, I'd love for @Southwest Air pilot to say, 'Long live ISIS,' before taking off. My guess is that 1, the plane would be immediately grounded, 2, the pilot fired, and 3, a statement issued by the airline within a matter of hours," she tweeted. That's the tweet. Okay. Is that comparing "Let's go Brandon" to "Long live ISIS"? Is that comparing that? I guess, tangentially it is. But all we're dealing with here is one person, one reporter, who didn't say, "Let's go Brandon" is like "Long live ISIS," but sort of gave a comparison point of, look, this is a pilot expressing a political belief, and then took an extreme version of a pilot expressing a political belief. And it's there. I'm not going to say it's fake. It's not going to say it's made up, but I'm saying that this is a very weak hook upon which to hang this argument, right? That it's a weak hook to hang this framing of the article. First example, going to be the most inflammatory example. Fox News saying mainstream journalists basically calling it the same as ISIS sympathizers. Okay. They go on in the article to identify other ways that this event or this term was characterized. Vulgar insult. Okay. Vulgar insult, that seems pretty reasonable. Right-wing slur. Again, that's one that doesn't fit my intuitive definition of slur, but I guess that it does.
I also don't
technically hit the dictionary.
I also don't really think it's right-wing either. It's someone. So there was a fortunate event, or unfortunate, depending on how you feel about it, where you had this NASCAR race, and then there was a NASCAR audience, and they were chanting something, the F Joe Biden thing, which I guess at a NASCAR event doesn't seem all that shocking that people would be, kind of vulgar and say what's on their minds or whatever. And the media reporter, possibly in part in an effort to sort of distract away from what's being said, because if the news picks it up, then they'll have to not play the segment, bleep it out because of all the foul language. It's like if someone ran in and just started shouting curse words into the microphone, the reporter has to try and not let that happen, because there's all these other codes and legal problems with using certain language on the news. And so she covers for it, and it could also have been for political reasons, but that doesn't really matter, because she tried to alter the conversation to make the phrase seem like it was something else. It became like this really funny, subversive way to essentially criticize the Biden administration, Democrats in general, whatever. And the fact that the left tends to overreact to those things only encourages people to do that more. So it is like a feedback loop. It feeds into itself, and everyone gets on board. Frankly, I lost interest in the Let's Go Brandon thing weeks ago. And when I heard that had happened, where Joe Biden said, I agree, when the guy called in, I knew the guy was playing a prank and was being, subversive. And it was like, the jester that says the emperor has no clothes. Like, that's kind of what he was going for. And in a way, it was effective because Biden didn't know. But then again, if he did, again, what should he have done in that instance? Should he have said something disparaging to that guy? Should he have shouted at that guy? Should he have disavowed that guy? I don't think that would have been wise either. So it doesn't, whether or not he was aware that was happening, I don't know. He may have even known, and he was just like, you know what, I'm just going to say, yes, let's go Brandon. And
I think it's clear how he should have responded, right? If he had known what was going on, he would say something like, okay, hey now, we're going to end the call, but Merry Christmas, right?
Yeah, he could do that.
That's
too.
all he needed to do, right?
Yeah.
But it is telling that he doesn't have the street smarts to even know that, wait a minute, this is a weird phrase that's being thrown at me now. It could have meaning that I'm not familiar with, right? Yeah. But instead, he wants to look like he's hip and in the know, and he's just assuming it's fine, and so he agrees with it. And that is a lack of judgment that you would expect somebody with his amount of experience in public life to have learned that kind of lesson. I think that the Let's Go Brandon thing is fascinating. I'm happy to be able to talk about it because I feel like this story wraps in enough. It gives it enough dimension to make it worth talking about. Yeah, even though my sensibility is like, look, I'm not somebody who. I don't like to be vulgar. It's not my frequency to go around saying F the president or code words for F the president. But here it's wrapped up enough in enough. It's wrapped into enough interesting stuff to make it worthwhile. Yeah. Now, the article frames it as, look, the left is calling us ISIS, right? On the basis of just that one little hair that they're able to hang that from. And then they go on with further examples, okay? And so here we've got CNN White House correspondent tweeting, if you think it's appropriate to tell somebody blah, 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 let's go Brandon. Okay, so the reason that I stopped there, this is couched well by the CNN guy. The question is, do you think it's appropriate, right? It's on Christmas. It's a family feel-good type thing. Do you think it's appropriate? Okay, maybe call me old school. I would say no, it's not appropriate. It's not the worst thing in the world. not the end of the world, but it is a fair framing for this reporter to be like, look, this was probably not appropriate, and call it out at that level. That's not calling us ISIS. It's not calling the right ISIS, right?
Sure.
The next one, senior reporter Edward Isaac Dovray writes, consider the mentality here of a father whose child is excited to talk about Santa Claus, et cetera, et cetera. Again, the framing, consider the mentality. Right? Okay, that's a reasonable thing. It sort of falls short of the alarmism. Now, the next example, the Atlantic's Ron Brownstein went so far as to claim that the phrase was a form of insurrection. Okay, and I'm not going to play this clip, but indeed that is what he says. He says this is about insurrection, and that is certainly a misrepresentation of the father's cheeky use of that term in the call, and one has to be aware of and transparent with the fact that this Brownstein character, he's got an agenda to push. He runs the Atlantic, and here's the Atlantic's January-February article. A cover, which says January 6th was practice. Okay, so he's sort of pumping up the next issue of the Atlantic, and so that sort of explains why he would phrase it that way. As we've covered in other episodes, I am very sympathetic to the concerns over January 6th. I think January 6th was a very big deal, but I think that he is inserting that a little bit into this discussion, and I'm not saying that that's inappropriate. That's how the game's played.
Mm-hmm. I would add too about the woman who made drew the parallels or was making another example of the same thing with the pilot, where if the pilot had said, something in support of ISIS, that the airline would have grounded the plane, fired him, and released a statement. I wonder, and I know that it's kind of hard to know this because I don't know if there was a discussion that followed or anything, but does she think that the pilot should have grounded the plane, been fired, and then the airline should have released a statement? Like, because she said that if he had said something about in support of ISIS, then these would have been the consequences. But she's saying that there were no consequences for the Let's Go Brandon thing, other than maybe some people were upset by the fact that he said it. But he didn't lose his job, to my knowledge. The plane wasn't grounded and everything went on as normal. So is she suggesting that should have been the punishment?
That's a good question.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
I'm sure that there are rules about what the pilots are supposed to say. I don't know if it's a regulatory, like legal rule, but I'm sure that there's an employee handbook somewhere that says the pilots are supposed to restrict their comments to
stuff that's
like operationally relevant and kind of feel good stuff.
Yeah, maintain professionalism, if I was running an airline, things like that. Sure. Yeah. All right.
Okay, so going on to other examples with tweets, and we've got Maggie Haberman, who is responding to sort of an ongoing discussion. She says, somehow this guy, the father who called in, is the true victim, and Biden was somehow in the wrong as a guy gets on the phone to troll him on Christmas Eve after Biden was kind to the guy. Okay, so this is, again, trying to...
I think they're creating more antagonism than there might have been. I mean, I don't even think that... Yeah, the guy said that, and he probably thought it was just too hilarious to pass up. But I don't think that he was, like, out to destroy people's Christmas experience. And, in fact, I think that there is a lot of really severe frustration under the surface in most people, as because of all of the measures that governments have taken with regards to COVID and lockdowns. And in some places, people are being segregated from other parts of society, like in Austria and in Australia and New Zealand. But I mean, even in the United States, depending on what state you're in, you're probably just really, really, really frustrated with the way things are. And I guess like if you criticize the administration for it, and at least their part to play, whether it's rational or not, because I do think that we as Americans tend to be a little bit too hyper focused on who's sitting in the Oval Office, when the truth is the president doesn't have as much power as people think, and they should probably be looking at their local governments, their governors, their people in the city councils, whatever. But they do tend to direct their ire at the person sitting in the Oval Office. And that's been the case since like my whole life, like from Jimmy Carter all the way, to today. It's always like, this is the scapegoat, right? But I understand their frustration. I guess that when it comes to like what the feelings and actions of normal citizens are, provided they're not harming anyone and they're just sort of expressing their, like I said, their frustrations with everything, whatever it is, I don't have a problem with that per se, but I do take issue with the way the media takes that and they use it to sort of like, create a storm in a teacup, as it were. It is, I'm not against us talking about the Let's Go Brandon thing, because I do find it fascinating, the way it's sort of evolved and this meme, I think it's running out of steam now because, it ultimately doesn't really change much. And so, people get to blow off a little steam by saying that, but it's just like a little bit of pressure release, right? It's not really going to do anything substantial. And so now that it's 2022 and the midterms are coming up, I think that's where people are going to be putting their energy into. And there will be more memes that will arise from this. But I do think that one is sort of running out of steam at this point. And I guess the last thing I'll say about it is going back to what I was saying about the media. That's sort of the phenomenon we're looking at where, Fox News sees this thing or gigantic right-wing media sort of, corporate sources. They grab a hold of this thing, they run with it, they use it to slam the other side, and then those media figures, they come forward and they return fire, and it goes back and forth. But and of course the purpose is to try to like essentially recruit or get people to side with them, or more often than not, it's simply something that exists to help those people confirm things that they already believe about the other side. But I think it's more the most of the harm comes from media figures, blue check marks, and not real like regular people. Because I found that when I'm out in the world and I go to people, talk to people in my community, especially here in Virginia, there's actually quite a wide variety of political views. And so, but when you sit down and talk to them, they're almost all willing to talk, and you find that their views are a lot more like, full of nuance and minutia than the way the media presents it. And I think that to not include the fact that people's political views, like many other views, social views, cultural views, moral views, spiritual views, exist on a spectrum, which I know is like a thing that we hear about gender, but no, when it comes to politics, that's and all these other factors, that's the truth about people. And it's funny because the media presents it like it's a binary. And it's not. I don't watch Fox or CNN. Like I look for independent, journalists and people who are doing a lot of research, and it all can be very boring, and but I find it really interesting because I'm not just interested in learning about what's happening. I'm interested in why, like the nature of people. Why do people believe as they do? Why do they respond this way? The psychology of the masses, things like that. I think that is a predictive factor in many ways too.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting question. Like, so how much do people really hold views that are embodied by what the media is saying? I mean, I feel like there are a lot of people that would approach the Let's Go we described at the beginning, Let's Go Brandon works for a particular reason. The reason it works is not because people on the right are deplorable. It works because it brings together these two complaints in a pithy way. That's why it works. Okay, and the left, and what we're seeing in the media, and I will finish off this Fox News story with a quote to back this up. That the sort of this mainstream point of view is to say, no, it's not that it works in this particular way and it has caught on for this reason and we can identify why it works. It's just because the other side is deplorable. Okay, and so we have Mehdi Hassan replying to Aaron Rupar, and I'll start with Aaron Rupar's, saying, when you boil it down, all the Let's Go Brandon thing amounts to is that people who hated Biden anyway have found a cute way to tell him to F off in public without losing their jobs or suffering other consequences. Okay, and Mehdi Hassan responds, encouraged by senior elected Republicans who pretend to otherwise care about civility and who are never asked by the press to justify their indulgence of this childish and offensive slogan. Missing the ball, right? There's a reason that this has caught on, right? But here we have people just pretending that that's not true. And I think that there are actually a lot of people who listen and get their information from this type of media who also are blind to the reasons that this has caught on. Now, just a few more elements on this story. So we have, of course, the natural follow-up to this. The Let's Go Brandon dad is considering a run for office.
Yeah.
Noah, get the boat.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I mean, this is how it works these days. Okay, he's put himself on the map. He has, 1,000 times increased his probability of winning. I don't know, was his probability of winning, 0.1% before, and now it's, I can't do the math. Was it 100% before, and now it's 10% or something like that? But yeah,
I mean, it could.
Guess that's how things work these days.
Well, it could be that they're just kind of like they did an interview and they asked him, what do you think, run in 2024? And he jokingly or not jokingly said, I don't know, yeah, maybe. Yeah, so I mean, I guess I don't see that. Like, I don't see that happening, but there have been people that have won elections in this there were recent elections. I think New Jersey had one, and there was a truck driver who didn't like the way things were being run economically, that, because there were all these supply shortages and things like that, so he wasn't getting work, and he had a lot of problems with the way that the government of New Jersey were operating, and so he spent about $100 on Facebook ads, and he won. He won, and he couldn't believe it. And I think that but we were talking about local governance, right? This seems to me like the Daily Wire is trying to run with this meme, and I don't see this happening. Because I don't know. I don't see this happening. I think that there are too many people who, while yes, they're frustrated with the current administration, they want things to go in another direction. They want to open the country back up. They want whatever, all these other things that they're after. I don't think that they're going to abandon reason and vote for some guy because he said, let's go Brandon right to Joe Biden.
No, he's not going to run for president, man.
Local office?
I think you're counting him too low. He's a former police officer, and he sort of put himself on the map. He could get some kind of he could use this as a springboard to start some kind of career in local politics. I think that that's not beyond the realm.
Yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful Christmas as well. Merry Christmas, and let's go, Brandon.
And then the final story we have on this is apparently there's a chain of stores in New England dedicated to selling Let's Go Brandon merchandise. And the store's chain's name is Let's Go Brandon, in New England, they had previously 8 stores, and they're going up to 10 stores. Huh.
Yeah.
I mean, now I agree. This meme has peaked.
Yeah, really.
This is a 2021 meme. It's not going to be so big for 2022. I would not be buying stock in this chain of stores. But this just illustrates it's sticky. This does scratch an itch that people on the right have. And I'm just fascinated by the left's difficulty in seeing what it does psychologically on the right, what it accomplishes, why it's successful on the right. And it brings to mind some research that the NYU professor Jonathan Haidt did. And I have an excerpt from his book here. So this is from his 2012 book, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And Haidt has written a number of books, and this is when this came out, this was a big book for me. I was absolutely fascinated by it. The central premise of the book is that people judge policy decisions on the basis of a variety of moral frameworks. And those frameworks operate in the mind sort of like, he uses the analogy of on your tongue, you've got sour receptors and salty receptors and sweet receptors. And he's saying in your brain, you have a receptor for this framework, receptor for that framework, and you can sort of turn them on and off and be less receptive to this, more receptive to that. And the frameworks that he proposes are care harm. Okay, so on one side you're caring about people, on the other side they're harming people. Each one of them is a dichotomy, care harm. Fairness cheating, loyalty betrayal, authority subversion, and sanctity degradation. Okay, and those 5 operate sort of on a spectrum where one axis would be an assessment of a sort of a preformed notion of how the world is supposed to be, right? So certainly authority subversion. Okay, in order to believe that there's authority subversion, you have to have some free-formed notion of how the world's supposed to be. Same thing with sanctity degradation. And he contends that on the left, people have much less of a preformed notion of how the world is supposed to be, and so they are less attuned to the moral dimensions that I listed later, okay, which would be, what it means is on the left, they're really focused on care harm, some people almost to the exclusion of other things. And people on the right will see a situation where, yes, on the care harm dimension, a certain policy might be appropriate, but on another dimension like fairness cheating or authority subversion, loyalty betrayal, those will come into play. Okay, so fascinating book. Although I would say I tried to revisit it fairly recently, and it is an illustration of just how much the political climate has changed since 2012. In 2012, it actually made sense to write a book about here's the psychological impulses that lead people to support this policy or support that policy. And today, it feels like all of that is just swamped by us versus them thinking. It's just swamped by the notion that people on the other side are just way, way bad. And our urgent duty is to try and stop them from their nefarious plans. That was a long introduction to this quote okay. That is now circling back to the topic of the left's inability to see even when the right has a reasonable point. So now quoting from Haidt's book. In a study I did with Jesse Graham and Brian Nosek, we tested how well liberals and conservatives could understand each other. We asked more than 2,000 American visitors to fill out the Moral Foundations questionnaire. 1/3 of the time, they were asked to fill it out normally, answering as themselves. 1/3 of the time, they were asked to fill it in how they would think a typical liberal would respond. 1/3 of the time, they were asked to fill in how a typical conservative would respond. This design allowed us to examine the stereotypes that each side held about the other. More important, it allows us to assess how accurate they were in comparing people's expectations about typical partisans to the actual responses from partisans on the left and right. Who was best able to pretend to be the other? The results were clear and consistent. Moderates and conservatives were most accurate in their predictions, whether they were pretending to be liberals or conservatives. Liberals were least accurate, especially those who described themselves as very liberal. The biggest errors in the whole study came when liberals faced the care and fairness questions while pretending to be conservatives. When faced with questions such as, one of the worst things a person could do is hurt a defenseless animal, or, as another question, justice is the most important requirement for society, liberals assumed that conservatives would disagree. If you have a moral matrix built primarily on intuitions about care and fairness, with fairness as equality, and you listen to the Ronald Reagan narrative, what else could you think? Reagan seems completely unconcerned about the welfare of drug addicts, poor people, and gay people. He's more interested in fighting wars and telling people how to run their sex lives. If you don't see that Reagan is pursuing positive values of loyalty, authority, and sanctity, you almost have to conclude that Republicans see no positive values in care and fairness. Okay, and so this is to say that on those moral dimensions, because people on the left get themselves into a state where they're almost colorblind to some of these considerations, they fail to understand how the other side is applying those considerations and therefore are not able to make accurate predictions. Now, this study was done, I don't know, the book was published in 2012. I would be curious to see how well this study reproduces today. As I said before, so much has changed about the political climate. But I think that what is being described here is very well in line with what we've seen with this little Let's Go Brandon kerfuffle, where the left was so strong in its assumption that the right had nothing to say worth hearing, that they hadn't even heard this extremely popular thing on the right, and that ignorance that they hadn't even heard it certainly caused Biden to, at a minimum, fumble the ball in this interaction. Not the most important ball, not the biggest ball. It's the Christmas Eve call-in show. Okay, but I don't think anyone would dispute that he fumbled the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. One thing that I have, because I have talked about this study before, because I found it interesting, and I've also been doing a lot of reading up on various sort of figures from the more Marxist, neo-Marxist, postmodern, feminist, queer theorists, and critical race theory section of the left. So I'm not talking about the left in general, but these more, extremely radical figures that are like rising up, and how far back it goes to like the 60s, Herbert Marcuse, and then before that there are others, Karl Popper, etc. But anyway, one of the things that I've noticed is a recurring thing that comes up is that and I'm saying this as a defense for the left in a way. So I'm going to try to explain something that I think I'm seeing that this study may not have compensated for potentially. The way that the left uses words, or the way that they see words, sometimes the words that they see have a different definition than the ones that moderates and conservatives use. So when they hear about, for example, you said that when faced with questions such as, one of the worst things a person could do is hurt a defenseless animal, or justice is the most important requirement for a society, I think that many on the left, when they see the word justice, it doesn't mean the same thing to them as it does to others, because, well, for one, in many ways, we're all operating under a kind of leftist paradigm if we were educated in public education and in university, and we experience some of these sort of social sciences and these kinds of things. There could have been levels of, alteration of those words. So like when I think of the word justice, for example, I think, things like a fair and speedy trial and innocent until proven guilty. And, everybody should be treated the same under the law, right? And that's it. Like, it should not be revenge. We should not act on accusations alone, etc. But I think that the way the left sees the word justice, it's no different from their term social justice, that these things are interchangeable. And they see it as it needs to take into account historical wrongs, institutional, wrongs against the disenfranchised, against minorities, women, the LGBTQ community, things like that. And so I think that when you present, like if you're doing the study that Jonathan Haidt did, and you present a statement and you ask leftists and conservatives and moderates to respond, they might see different questions. And I think they do. I think that one of the main reasons why we're running on all these problems is because we are literally not speaking the same language to each other, even though it looks the same. We're not speaking the same language. And I think that we have to find ways to break those barriers, even when we're using the same words. So when they say imperialism, capitalism, colonization, whiteness, patriarchy, men, rape culture, rape itself, any other number of words, when they say it, it doesn't mean what we think it means when we hear it. And so I guess I like this study and I like Jonathan Haidt. So I'm not taking issue with it at all, but I think that there is another layer that needs to be taken into consideration if you're wondering, well, why does the left so misunderstand everyone else? And I think it's partly because they don't really have an honest conversation with those people to really understand where they're coming from. But I also think it's because there are words that they use that have a completely different meaning from the way that most other people use it.
That's a great point. And it's a great point, cueing in especially on the word of justice. That illustrates it very well, right? So the left's, I think, formation of justice or interpretation of justice is in all the totality of the cosmos and history, right? People who take philosophy classes, traditional philosophy of ethics, the type of problem that would be posed would be, there's individual A, and there's individual B, and they're both in a scenario, and A does this. Is it just for B to do that? Is it ethical for B to do that, right? And the underlying assumption to be able to even frame the question in that way is that you should be able to answer an ethical question with just the four corners of the situation, and that who it is doesn't matter. And the left, I think, tends to reject that argument and say, well, no, we have to understand, we have to incorporate the whole history of how each person came about to be in this situation, and what went on with their parents, and how were they nurtured, and it has the effect of taking basically all questions of situational justice and making them intractable, in the sense that it's we have to have full agreement on the meaning of all of history in order to assess what should happen even in a single particular case. And I think that the preferences of who is drawn to this feeling of this, or this framing of justice, is, okay, who wants the situation to be intractable versus who wants the situation to be easily resolvable. Okay, and well, what do you do in an intractable situation? Well, if you can't solve the problem, then you're left without principles, and you're going to have to. You're essentially going to be like, well, who is pulling at my heartstrings the most in this situation? Which is very quickly going to lead to, well, who am I just already inclined to care about more in this situation? Right? And that person that I'm inclined to care about more is going to be the one that comes out better because we didn't have a principle to rely on. And I think that this is this is a factor where the empathy gap comes into play, right? Men expect to not receive much more empathy. That's just a part of much empathy. That's just a part of male disposability, right? And so men look at it and go, hey, I think that we want clear principles so that we can have predictability, we can move forward and know that we will be treated with situational fairness, right? Yeah. Because we don't anticipate that if it becomes an intractable analysis and therefore it's going to come down to who's pulling on the heartstrings, we're not very good at pulling on people's heartstrings. People's heartstrings are not attached to us very strongly.
That's right. And we don't really want to go down that road for a number of other reasons. So I think the best way, at least that, most of us determine, is that, well, we're just going to have to try to be as objective as possible. And we are, to some degree, still going to be influenced by emotion, even when we try to remain as, factual and logical and dry as we can. But it is a struggle, and it does, just like you said, it's, that's not something that men not only can do, but even if they could, it would not be as effective as, when women do it. Or children for that matter.
So the last thing I have on this whole line of thought, the Christmas Brandon situation, is it reminds me of a short video that I had made last year about the idea of belief houses and how the role that a belief plays in a person's life is that it becomes sort of a pillar. It becomes something that they rely on that helps them form an understanding of the world, figure out how they're going to move through it. And it serves the role of supporting them in their day-to-day habits and their day-to-day needs and getting through what they need to do. It does fulfill that role. It also can separate them from other people. It can cause them to view other people disparagingly or not give other people a chance. And I think that we need to be cognizant of the idea that changing a person's mind is an attempt to take away part of the structure that helps them proceed through the world. So let me just show you the video. It's just about a minute and a half. We all view the world from our individual belief houses. What is a belief house? We humans are limited creatures, constantly bombarded by a chaotic world and mentally in need of shelter, which often our beliefs provide for us. We each try to acquire the best beliefs, ones that will make us strong and resilient. We try to avoid flimsy beliefs because each of us can remember a time when we fell into a seductive belief that flew away and left us exposed. Good beliefs help us thrive and will fill our lives with meaning. We don't choose beliefs carelessly. Instead, we draw upon personal experience and learn from the people we trust and respect. When we encounter someone with a belief house that disagrees with our own, we see this in some way as a problem. A person might try to convince the other to give up a part of their house, even employing pressure through shaming or ostracizing them. These coercive tactics may cause change in the short run, but too much of them over time makes our society harsh and divided. What would happen if we didn't view disagreement as such a big problem? It is a fact of life, after all. Each of us is trying to build our belief house out of the best ideas, instead of fixating on the differences between our belief houses, maybe we would do better to focus on the human beings inside, navigating this chaotic world, and who were just trying to find some shelter. There is a new place online to find content that interests you. Please visit us at roil.com. So it makes me, the Let's Go Brandon situation reminds me of this video because it's an illustration of how the belief house of the Democrats prevented them from seeing the role that the Let's Go Brandon was playing sort of within the belief house of people on the right. And like I said before, caused them to fumble the ball in this instance.
Yep. Well, I think that what I've noticed, I may have said this before, and if I have, I apologize. But on the show that I host, I invite speakers or guests for interviews from all over the political spectrum. Because we have a focus on discussing men's issues, and in my opinion, men's issues should not be partisan. It shouldn't really be a partisan subject. But because we have been lambasted by the media, we have been called extremists, we've been called far right. We were even I think recently the SPLC added a couple of members of the men's, the sort of broader men's rights movement sphere to their hate list, which means that there are a number of people that will not associate with us. They will not speak to us. And so they won't really know where we're coming from because they don't want anything to do with it. So what I've noticed is that when it comes to guests, leftists are the people that are most difficult to get on, whether they're feminists or not. And I have had some, a good number, I would say, but most of the time it seems like conservatives, right-wingers, libertarians, moderates, anarchists, they're all willing to talk to me. And I think they really want to exchange these ideas too. Because I want to, because I want them to try to look at all of the things that are happening today, all of the challenges that everyone is facing, regardless of their political affiliation, as a byproduct, as a symptom of the breakdown of the relationship between men and women and everything that has come from that. I think, and this narrative, this belief that throughout most of history, men have built societies to benefit themselves and at the expense of women. And I think that actually does, even though it can't be really clearly seen, there is a through line from there to, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, lockdowns, people losing their jobs, cancel culture, the Me Too movement, and countless other issues. And but I guess what I'm getting at is that there are people that want to reach out and they want to sort of, how do I put it, strengthen their ability to discuss the world as they're perceiving it, not necessarily strengthen their views that they already hold, but rather challenge them in part, but also add to them, maybe add new material. So, if I talked to an AM radio host about a year ago or so, and he was a mainstream AM conservative talk show guy that he always spoke about whatever the new thing was that day or that week, whatever it was, like so-and-so got killed by a cop and now it's racism, and then he basically just speaks to it. And I basically, when I spoke to him, my goal was to get him to look at these things in a new way. And so when I talked about all the things that are happening, I basically say, okay, well, let's look at this. Like, let's say, I don't remember which one, but there was, around that time, he had spoken to an incident involving a black man who was killed by police. I don't remember, or shot by police. It could have been the guy who didn't get killed, but he was in the news anyway. It doesn't really matter. because he had a specific point of view, which was it was essentially in line with the Fox News perspective, with the Daily Wire perspective. And oftentimes these are like oversimplified. You know, he was like, well, the guy was a criminal and he tried to kidnap this woman's kids and the cops were trying to stop him and he pulled out a knife. And all of that is true. Like I told him, I believe all that's true. But when you discuss what's happening, one of the mistakes that you make and the left makes is they start the story from there. And so I said, but that's starting the story in the middle. And I'm not going to go as far back as saying, well, because slavery existed once, that's why this guy has, you know, his kids at knife point, because I think that's ridiculous. I think at some point adults have to take responsibility. But I do think that if you look at his history, you can see how he got to this point. Like you can see like where things began and how he got here. And I said, this is, I think, a reasonable amount of compassion for someone like this, because they're in a position that in some ways they didn't have much control over. And I think that this is the linchpin, right? And so, but on the plus side, he was very receptive. I mean, ultimately what I wanted to talk about was the problem with fatherlessness in the Black population in the United States and how it leads to drug abuse, depression, suicide, criminality. But that's not really common. Teen pregnancy, child abuse, and all these other things, all of these other factors, which contribute to antisocial personality disorders, an antisocial way of being, you know, people who use violence to solve problems, all of these other things. And I told him that's where this is coming from. And it's not, and I know, and I said, look, I know you're not racist. I know you don't think that this is just the nature of these people to do this. But if you don't start looking at the cause, like, and this means, by the way, holding women accountable for their part to play, because they're almost never, no one talks about single motherhood. Nobody talks about these things, right? And the effects it has, because we're all afraid of criticizing women. And, you know, there could be a number of reasons for that. But my point is, and I'm sorry for belaboring this so much, but he wanted to be exposed to these other ideas. And I'm glad that there are some that do, because I think that is absolutely correct. I think that we need to stop settling into these like very catchy, repeatable, meme-like talking points that we use, whether we're trying to own the libs or own the cons, and just like try to get to the truth. And the only way you can do that is through conversations, like serious conversations. And so I guess all I will say is I'm glad that I've been lucky enough to have them with the people that I have.
See, I think that's fascinating what you described. So what you did is you flipped the perspective where he was coming at it from the traditional, what you hear all the time now, which is, I'm trying to see this other guy as a monster. Okay? Guy on the other side, I know that the other side's full of monsters. My whole message to my audience is the other side's full of monsters half the time. Excuse me, not mine.
No,
right?
I know what you mean.
The hypothetical person.
Yeah,
okay. And so when they're in that point of reference, they're thinking, yeah, what I'm going to do today, what I do every day is I'm going to get on and talk about how the other side's full of monsters, right? And you flipped the perspective and said, no, try to see this person as a human being. Try not to see them as a monster, right? And of course, that's what they are. They're a human being. It is fascinating, and I've heard it commented about, not just by you, but by a lot of people, that people are more willing to sort of go on and be challenged in new environments when they're not on the far left. You know, that it does seem to be that people express that it's hard to get people on the far left on to have serious discussions. And of course, that's got to be part and parcel of what we've been talking about the whole time, which is that people on the left do have, at least to some degree, a sense of, look, people who aren't on our side have nothing possibly informative that they could tell us or something, you know, that maybe they're from that point of view. But I do think that it is worth talking to everybody, because if you have all these different positions of belief, the one thing that is unique about the truth, and I'm not saying exactly that there's like one true truth or that I have one true truth, but there's a collection of things that are more truth than other things. Okay, and of that that's what I'm describing as the truth. The thing about the truth is whatever belief system you're in now, you can always get to the truth from that belief system, right? Martin Luther King had, a line that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that the arc of long conversations is long, but it bends towards truth. Mm-hmm. And what even people coming at it from a biased perspective, people coming at it from a lot of attachment to a false belief, there is some nudging that can happen towards the truth, and the truth is like it's the lodestar that all of these beliefs can sort of gravitate towards if people participate in enough and the right conversations and keep their minds open.
Well said.
All right. Well, thank you again. It's always good to talk with you. We'll talk in a couple of weeks.
All right. Yeah, good. I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for watching. You can download the Roil app at your app store by searching for Roil Mobile or Roil Technology. Or you can sign up at roil.com. We'll see you there.